Good evening, everyone. I'm going to try and get to the next slide here. There we go. As Drew mentioned, my name is Kathy Reimer. I actually used to work for the city of Chandler, but I retired a couple years ago and have been spending a lot of time in my yard lately working on irrigation. It doesn't sound very fun, especially during the summertime, but I actually worked for the Water Conservation Office here in Chandler for 11 years, but long time back, I graduated from ASU with a degree in education, and my major was biology. And I was lucky enough to end up working at the University of Arizona Extension Office, and some of you may have heard of that, before I started water conservation work in both the town of Gilbert and the city of Chandler. But tonight, I'm hoping I can give you some good ideas on adding color to your landscape. And we have lots of great photos. I wish I could show you live plants, but maybe we can do that in the future. But for tonight, it'll be mostly nice photographs and hopefully give you some inspiration. There are some class materials that you should have been able to receive via email, and if you didn't, contact the Chandler Water Conservation Office and they can get those mailed out to you. So the first one I'm going to bring your attention to is just a summary of the class. It's called Color Your World, and it gives you some good tips. It's not very long. It gives you some good tips on choosing colorful plants and how to actually, plan your landscape. The next one is a resources list, and this is great to refer to. It has some books, also some great websites, including the city of Chandler and the town of Queen Creek, as well as some other materials which I'll point out as we go through the presentation. There's also a plant list, and this is in a table format, and we'll be going through this in sort of the second half of the presentation tonight, starting with trees, shrubs, ground covers, and so on. And it'll give you their mature size and when they bloom, and just some important information. There's a top 10 landscape tip publication that will sort of give you the how-tos on getting started with your landscape. And a 4-page document on landscape themes, whether you want to go with a Sonora Desert theme or even a Mediterranean theme. Those can all be accomplished using plants, different types of plants. The other class materials are brochures, and some of you might want to use these online, or some may prefer a hard copy. They look like this. So we have the landscape plants for the Arizona desert. These are all free brochures. You can get them from your water conservation office or perhaps your local city library or town library. There's one at the lower left, the xeriscape brochure. Has some beautiful pictures of plant combinations, and some of them I have included in the presentation tonight. The brochure in the middle is watering, which of course is critical to any landscape, and this one will show you how to do it correctly. As Drew mentioned, there's going to be a few questions going through the program tonight. And when you see the big blue question mark, that means that one of the polls is coming up. So just be aware of that as we go along. There aren't very many, just a few questions. And that leads us to this slide, which, as you all know, is a photograph of our planet Earth. And the blue color that you see is what? I think you all know what that is. But what you may not know is how much of all the water on the planet is fresh. Fresh for us to use, to drink, to bathe, to water our landscapes. So the question coming up has to do with how much fresh water is available on the earth for us to use. Okay, so it looks like we got some really great answers. And it may surprise you that of all the water on the planet, there's less than 1% that's available for us to use, fresh water. There's a little bit that's locked in the polar ice caps, but for the rest of us, it's that 1%. And that's why it's so important for us to be careful with how much water we use, or perhaps how much water we waste. Good job answering the questions, though. And we live in a desert. I think most of you probably know that. But the desert that we live in is so unique and so special. It has the most diverse selection of plants, the most diverse selection of wildlife, and it's just a very special place for us to live. And we have a question for you on the desert. Well, it looks like most everyone got this one right, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes we'll talk to people and they don't really know the name of the desert where we live, our Sonora Desert. Here is what the Sonoran Desert looks like. It encompasses Baja California into mainland California, Arizona, and down into Mexico. And if you thought this summer was hot, you were right. This is an image from the U.S. Drought Monitor that shows the severity of the drought, especially it's apparent here in the western U.S., with the red being the areas of extreme drought. And Arizona looks pretty bleak, although look at Utah and Colorado. I was surprised to see that. They update this once a week, so this one came out late last week. Hopefully things will improve, but right now it's looking pretty bleak. And that brings us to this word that we call xeriscape. Some of you may have heard it, and some may be a little intimidated by trying to pronounce it. That's okay. It's just a word that was coined from two others, xeric and landscape, into xeriscape. And it's simply put, it's just using plants that don't take a lot of water to create a natural landscape. To help you remember how to pronounce this word, it's xeriscape, here are some examples. So remember that xeric or xeros means dry. So xeric environments are deserts. Xerophytes are desert plants. Xerox is a dry copy. That one should be easy to remember. And therefore, xeriscapes are dry landscapes. So don't let the X trip you up. It's pronounced like a Z. So xeriscape. Here is a xeroscape, which is sometimes the way people pronounce that word, the xeroscape. This is zero, not xeriscape. And there is absolutely nothing growing in this yard. And I'm happy to say it's not a home in Queen Creek or Chandler. It's actually a picture of a home in Mesa. But that's not what a xeriscape is. This is a xeriscape. It's colorful, it has interesting textures of plants. It's easy to take care of. Here's another image. And another one. This is a big mesquite tree with some filtered shade underneath where they've got some container plants growing. Another xeriscape, kind of simple. This one's kind of simple. More xeriscape. These are flowers, perennial flowers. So if you think of your extension as your landscape as an extension of your living space, it might help you understand the principle. It should be appropriate, of course, to the architecture of your home, your lifestyle, of course, where you live, and your budget. And these three things, color, form, and texture, can create impact in your landscape. And we'll go over these elements. So by using contrasting and complementary colors, using mass plantings of colors, a variety of textures, and then finally the forms of plants. And I find that if you remember this principle, that's grouping plants in your yard like you would arrange furniture in your home, it makes it a lot easier to figure out where to put things in your yard, in your landscape. So think of you have a rug in your home. That could be a ground cover. You have draperies on the walls. Those could be vines out in your yard. And in your home, you generally don't put a chair in every corner. You group things together, a couple of chairs with a table perhaps. So that's the way you can group plants in your landscape for a much more visual impact. You can also create layers and microclimates, and you can accessorize. This is a portion of the color wheel, and this side that has reds and oranges and yellows, these are considered warm and hot colors. Now, of course, they're not warm to the touch, but they trick your mind into thinking warm or even hot. And on the other side of the color wheel, we have the blues and greens, or perhaps even some purples. These are the cool, relaxing colors. Again, not because when you touch them they're cool, but they make your mind relax. Those hot, warm colors, they can be very intense, especially the color red. That people say that it raises your metabolism and your blood pressure, and that orange is enthusiastic, might even create the sensation of heat. And yellow attracts attention. Think about how many traffic signs are yellow because they catch your eye. And here is a landscape that has some of those vivid, aggressive red colors. And not only in the plants in the landscape, but also in the tile on the roof and the color of the little stucco wall. The cool, calm colors, the blues and purples and greens, the blue is tranquil, stable, purple, mysterious. That's kind of interesting. And the greens are restful and peaceful. This landscape has more mauve tones in it, with a few sort of splashes of the yellow down the pathway. But overall, it's a very calm landscape, calm colored landscape. You can also use complementary colors. A lot of these occur naturally in nature. Just think about how many plants with green leaves have red flowers. But plants that have yellow flowers can be combined with those that have purple or violet colors, and that's a very stunning combination. And here's an example. We've got some yellow or almost yellow-orange California poppies along with some purple lupin. those great complementary colors. And it doesn't just have to be in the plants themselves. You can add color to a wall, like the stucco on this one, to bring in those complementary colors or the color that you like. Here's another wall that is used for the background of these container succulents. It really sets them off. And you can also create monochromatic landscapes. It might not be as interesting as those complementary colors, but just depends on your own preference. This photograph, I took this in a photograph in a neighborhood where I used to live because I love that little sort of bistro table back there between beyond the entrance, but there just wasn't enough color. If you can imagine perhaps a bougainvillea growing across the top of that arch, that would bring in the reds or that sort of reddish fuchsia color and would really set it off. And I once had a friend of mine who had just happened to be a landscape architect. He said, yeah, all you have to do is pick your color and then find the plant that has that color. It sounded pretty easy, but we'll see if we can make it work. So what about these desert adapted plants? You've probably heard of them, or people may have been trying to encourage you to use them or plant them. So this is your next question. Why do we want to use desert adapted plants? The best answer is going to be all of the above. We've got desert adapted plants need less water. And I have to say that even though they need less water, they may not necessarily use less water. They probably will use all the water you give them. So it's kind of up to you to figure out how much water they really need versus giving them more than they really need to look good in your landscape. So less water, less is probably more in this case. And because they're better adapted here, you'll find that they use or they need less pesticide, or you won't have to apply as much pesticide, and they're not going to have as many pests or diseases. They do attract native wildlife. Now, I'm not talking about things like pigeons or grackles. The native plants attract some of our native birds and also native pollinators. And if you plant things like trees on the east or west sides of your home, you're going to enjoy some energy savings. For the most part, as long as you're watering correctly, they need minimal maintenance. And that's a good thing. That gives you more time to do other things besides worry about, pruning the plants you have in your yard. And here's some of the native wildlife that you might find attracted to desert adapted plants. And who doesn't love hummingbirds? We have a couple that are year-round residents and some others that fly through on their migratory routes. They not only need nectar a nectar source, which they find in flowers, but they also need their diet to be 50% protein, which they get from insects. And they don't get insects in the hummingbird feeders. They get the insects mainly from visiting flowers. Sometimes they catch them in the air as well. Hummingbird eggs are about the size of those Jelly Belly candies. And if you provide the food source in your yard, you may be rewarded with some hummingbird nests. Some of our native birds that you might find attracted to the desert adapted plants are things like, this would be from left to right, we have the Gila woodpecker, mourning doves, and cactus wrens, as well as native pollinators like butterflies. Arizona has a very healthy population of butterflies. So here are some design rules, and these are also listed in your in the class summary handout. But try and keep your landscape design simple. Now, I know that some of you may not be doing an entire yard. Maybe you're just going to start out with a small project, which is probably a good idea, and kind of feel your way through, get used to the idea of using some of these plants. But whatever, keep it simple. You can have lofty goals, and you can write these all down on paper. You can make a list of things you want to include in your landscape, and then time and budget may decide how much you can do at one time. Decide on a main theme or goal, and you can use the landscape theme handout as an example. If you want a Mediterranean theme, or if you want a tropical theme, you can accomplish that using desert adapted plants. Try and stick to 1 or 2 focal points, and I have some examples that I'll show you in a few minutes. And have a short plant material list. And this is the one that I always struggle with because I want to try them all in my yard, and it's sometimes frustrating. But you can take pictures of landscapes. You can use magazines, brochures, some of the free brochures that the cities have. Or you can start a Pinterest page. When you find something you like, you add it to your Pinterest page, keep a record of it until you're ready to get started with your project. Some other things to consider is to work with Mother Nature instead of against her. It has been a long, hot summer, and even some of the toughest plants are really struggling after our record temperatures. If you try to create a natural look, it will look more natural. And the informal landscapes are usually easier and less costly to maintain. Try working with odd numbers of plants, so 3s, 5s, or 7s, rather than 1 or 2, than the even numbers. You can use plants to frame views, either by enhancing a view or even blocking a view. Tucking, massing, and layering are nice techniques to have. And I'll show you an example here. But don't forget to leave open space in your landscape. Don't try to cover every square inch with a plant. Some of our plants, especially our cacti, are huge, and you may only need 1 in your yard. If you're lucky enough to have raised planters, you can use plants that spill or cascade over the edges, and that looks very interesting. This is a young landscape, and you'll notice that they've got some trees, some ground covers, and even some grass. One technique that works really well, especially if you have a smaller area, is to use curved lines instead of square lines with 90-degree corners. It actually tricks your eye into thinking that the space is larger. So the curved line around this grass, it kind of actually leads your eye around the corner where you can't see off the slide. But it does make the landscape look a little larger and more interesting. Instead of having a solid sidewalk or pathway, try breaking it up. Here's, I don't know if this is concrete, it looks more like flagstone to me, but they've broken it up so it's not solid. Here's another idea. This is a solid concrete walkway, but they've staggered the sections. So it gives it a more interesting look. And here they do have pieces of flagstone where they've taken colorful pieces of pottery or tile and put in between and then mortared them in. This example has borders which contain the granite, and then they've added flagstone pieces in the center. But again, it's curved, kind of makes you want to know what's back behind that corner. And you don't have to use granite, concrete or flagstone at all if you don't want to. Here's a pathway. It's kind of subtle, but the size of the granite is much smaller in the pathway than it is in the surrounding area. And that makes it more stable, so people can walk on it. Even wheelchairs can move through it easily. Sometimes they add a stabilizer to the small granite area to keep the pieces from moving. There is a process to create a landscape design, and you can see that number 5 is selecting the plants. So we're not going to talk about plants right now. We're going to sort of do a quick summary of what they call a site analysis or a property assessment, and then a needs and wants list. We'll take a look at a bubble diagram, and might give you some ideas on how to create an outdoor room. So let's get started. So this site analysis or property assessment, it just looks at your house and the way it sits on your property. But you have to also consider your lifestyle, how you like to use your property, or if you entertain, your surroundings, and how the sun and weather sort of impact your home and your property. So this is a typical house footprint. And you can create one of your house by you can use graph paper, you can just sketch it if you want to. But this is just a generic home, and it's facing south. So the driveway or the street is up at the top of the page, and the driveway is facing south. So we're going to look at the sun angles on this property, the wind direction, how people move through or on the property, and also how water moves on it. We're going to kind of consider the views and then the plant placement. So here are the sun angles. And there's 2 different seasons that we're going to look at here. We're going to look at the summer sun, and it rises I always have to think about this in my head before I say it because I get it wrong sometimes. In the summer, the sun rises in the northeast, and it sets in the northwest. In the winter, now this is like December 21st. In the winter, the sun rises in the southeast and sets in the southwest. So the sun angles are very different depending on the seasons. And when it comes to plant placement, the shadows that are cast by the sun, especially the winter sun, might impact the way that you place plants on your property. So I think I'm going to go to the next slide here. Okay, so what I want to do is to help you remember how the sun rises in the summer versus the winter. I want you all to stand up wherever you are, at your desk or in your living room. Stand up and face south. It'll give you a good chance to stretch anyway. And make sure you're facing south, because this doesn't work unless you're facing south. Then the next thing is to imagine that you're standing on a giant clock dial and 12 o'clock is straight ahead of you. 6 o'clock behind you, and then 3 o'clock is to your right, 9 o'clock is to your left. Now in the winter, let me start backwards. In the summertime, the sun rises at about 8 o'clock on your clock dial. So I want you to take your left arm and kind of stretch it out, or stretch both arms out, but your left arm, take your left arm and kind of rotate it back to where 8 o'clock is on your clock dial. Remember, you're standing in the middle of the dial and 12 o'clock straight ahead. So 8 o'clock, if you move your left arm back, you get it, you can move it comfortably back to about 8 o'clock. Then as the sun travels through the sky during the day, you can raise your arm to almost straight over your head. So at noon in the summer, the sun is almost straight overhead. Then if you switch arms, raise your right arm up so that it meets your left arm right above your head. Then take your right arm and move it back to about 4 o'clock on the clock dial. And that's about where the sun sets in the summertime. So you can imagine that in the summer, there's not much shade cast by an object because the sun comes up straight overhead and then sets back here at about 4 o'clock. There might just a tiny shadow cast in front of you. So in the summertime, it's hard to find a place that has a shadow unless you're behind a structure, a tall structure. Now in contrast, in the winter, the sun rises at about 10 or 11 o'clock on your clock dial. So do that. Take your left arm and stretch it up to about 11 o'clock on your clock dial. And instead of moving your arm straight over your head, in the winter, when the sun moves across the sky, it stays fairly low. So your arm should come up sort of pointing right over your nose and out in front of you at 12 o'clock. And then use your right arm to continue that circle, so that when the sun sets, your right arm comes over here to about 1 or 2 o'clock. And then you can see that during the winter between 10 or 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and because the sun doesn't rise high in the sky, you're going to have long shadows behind you to the north of you. And that might impact where you plant things that need full sun. If they get a lot of shade in the winter, they might not be as happy as they would be in an open area where they would receive full sun. So just keep that in mind. And you can see on this example, you can sit down now. On this example, in the wintertime, those shadows are going to be at the bottom of this illustration. So there'll be long shadows there. So that is, you can call it a sun dance or you can call it whatever you like, but that is a good exercise to figure out where the shadows are in your yard when you stand on your own property. Just remember to face south when you do it. Okay, next we're going to look at the way that the wind moves through our property. Here in the Phoenix area, our prevailing winds actually come from the west for most of the year. And then about the 1st of July, when we get our monsoon season, the winds shift and they start coming in from the southeast, sometimes a little more east, but in that general vicinity, from the southeast. Next, we'll look at how you move on your property. So the little path that I just put in shows you a possible route to get from the back door of the garage out to the driveway. And this could be a concrete path, it could be a gravel path, or it could just be an open space in your landscape where there aren't any obstructions so that you can move freely through that area. And I'm going to throw a few more in here. So here's one from the back of the garage out to the backyard, and one from the back patio out into the yard, and another one that goes from the front sidewalk out to the street. These are just my ideas. You could place yours wherever you like. Next, we're going to look at how water moves off the roof of this house. And we're just going to assume that the pitch is from from the center to the sides. So those are what the blue arrows represent. As the water falls to the ground, it goes somewhere on your landscape. And usually lots are graded so that the water moves towards the front and out into the street, like this. Some may go to the back, but generally most of the water is, the lot is sloped so that most of the water goes to the front. There's a few more arrows. What if we were able to slow the path of that water down so that it could soak into our landscape? It's really easy. We can dig shallow depressions. This is not a pit. This is a shallow depression, maybe 6 inches deep, but wide. And it's called a swale, S-W-A-L-E, swale. This will slow the water, so water will accumulate in these swale areas when we have light rainfall. And if we get heavy rainfall, then the water will continue its path out towards the front of the property. But I'm going to put several in this example because we want to save as much water as we can. The soil that you excavate from these depressions, you can use to create contouring mounds. So mounds that are above the level of the surrounding grade. And these add interest to a landscape, and you can even plant things on top of the mounds, things that don't like to be in low areas where water collects, things like agaves, other plants like that. So here are some other examples of some mounds, some contouring mounds. And here's an actual photograph of a swale. This was a home that we lived in several years ago, and I went out early in the morning to get the picture before the water soaked down completely into the soil. You can kind of see on the right, behind that shrub with the red flowers, there's a water line where some debris is kind of collected. So there was much more water in this area, but it quickly soaks into the ground. So again, we're not asking you to create pits or ponds. This is just an area where the water collects and then soaks into the soil. And in this landscape, it was able to water some trees that were nearby, as well as these shrubs. Next, you might consider adding a small area of grass. We love our grass areas, and they're great. They feel cool on your feet. Pets usually love them. And then adding trees on the east and west sides of the home will give you some shade. I'm adding just some areas of color, and these could be areas for wildflowers, maybe plants that collect or attract butterflies or hummingbirds. I'm just adding the color blobs that represent that. And then finally, I'm going to add some plants whose flowers are represented by the colors. So we have some with purple or lavender, some with yellow, some with orange, some with red. And these will just pop in here as I talk along. But I've tried, because we have a western exposure here and a backyard that gets a little bit of summer sun, I'm adding plants that have those cool colors. So the blues and the pinks, rather than too many of the yellows and oranges and reds. Those, again, they make you feel hot, even though they're not hot to the touch. Probably the worst thing you want to do is add a red or an orange flowered plant on a western exposure where it's already very warm. The color just makes it feel hotter. This landscape has a lot of the things that we've been discussing. It has a focal point, it has that kiva. There are a lot of different textures. There's plants with soft textures. There's plants that kind of have spiky textures. There's an ocotillo back there next to that kiva. There are curves. And I'm not sure if this one was intentional or not, but the color in the rocks in the very foreground almost matched the color on the wooden fence behind the kiva. And the color in the flagstone matches the color of the flowering grass, the bunch grass here, that pink color. For a focal point, you might consider a fountain of some kind. These are recycling fountains, and the sound of water is very relaxing. You might find that you'll get hummingbirds and other birds visiting the fountain to get a drink, especially on hot days. So now we're down to some other steps in our landscape design process. But remember that if you get stuck, pick your color and then find a plant that has that color. There are some things to remember when we go shopping for plants. And that leads us to the next question. And it is really important to think about the mature size of a plant before you place it in your landscape. I know a lot of you may not have, excuse me, may have inherited a landscape that already has things in it. And one big mistake that many people make because they just don't know is putting a plant that's going to become huge in a small space. And that leads to issues like continual pruning, or it becomes a plant that you hate because it's just in the wrong spot. So think about the mature size. It's if you're going to get it ready to replace a plant, or if you're starting a renovation. Replacing shrubs is pretty easy. Shrubs are not too expensive. Trees, on the other hand, they're a lot more expensive. So I hope you don't have to worry about any trees in your yard. The other things to consider might be whether a plant, especially a tree, is deciduous or evergreen. The light requirements, which we talked a little bit about when we were going through that sun exercise. The hardiness, and that refers to the cold temperature that a plant can withstand. Possible problems. Some plants have some, as I say, enemies that can create some problems for them. Other things that you might consider, whether they have thorns. That's a big one, especially if you have little ones or for plants around a pool. And think about native plants. If you get stuck, native or desert adapted, they kind of are synonymous there because they have fewer problems, fewer issues. Here's an example of a tree that was planted in the wrong space. I know you may not be able to tell from this picture what type of tree this is, but it's a mesquite. Hey, I know, but how many of you have mesquites? There's no doodle poll for this. It's just a question to think about. If you have a mesquite in your yard, maybe your neighbor has one. They're huge. They're huge trees. And this one got crammed into a little 10 by 10 foot patio here. And it's just, it's having problems. the homeowners, most likely this tree is rubbing on the stucco and the roofing tile. And so this is what happens. The tree gets pruned, maybe whacked is another descriptive term for that. And it's hard for the tree, it's bad, bad for the tree. Too bad for the homeowner has to, do this to save their home. But a little planning ahead can help in that situation. Plants can be used for design elements, to define a space, of course, for shade and shelter. We all need more shade here. For interest and seasonal change, like the color change, green changing of the leaves, and even container plants. Here's an example of a landscape. This happens to be a Chandler landscape. It is a xeriscape. It has desert adapted plants. They have a little bit of a yard and they have a pool, but it's still considered a xeriscape. Another landscape has another curved border to their lawn, but has layers, has ground covers, things close to the ground, the medium-sized shrubs, and then the tree layer. This home is in Central Phoenix in a historic district where they don't have fences. They use oleanders for their fences, and so hence the oleanders in the background there. But this homeowner took out a lot of grass and put in desert adapted plants. There's Palo Verde there in the foreground, along with some pink Mexican primrose. And he added a little bubbling bath, bird bath. For those narrow side areas that a lot of homes have, here's an idea, because a lot of them are too small to put a tree in for shade. There's just not enough room. But here's a lattice work that might be something to consider. You could even put up shade cloth on the top of this. And just some quick conversion photos. We're not going to talk about converting in this class, but these are interesting to look at because here's the way this little home started. And they took out some grass and added some plants that were adapted to this area. And now it's much more interesting and colorful to look at. This home is in Tempe, and they also took out some of their grass and added desert adapted plants. So now it looks like this, a lot less maintenance. This is the home in Chandler. They did a major renovation. They enclosed the carport there and made a garage and then transformed the landscape. So now it looks like this. Another home in Tempe. And if you keep your eye on the vigas on the left, that's about the only thing that looks the same after they did their transformation. Here it is. Another small yard that they transformed into something a little more interesting and less maintenance. Those small areas of grass are very hard to water without it getting all over the sidewalk or running off. So these folks just decided to take the grass out and put in something a lot easier to maintain. And the last one, this is a home in Chandler, and it was at the end of a cul-de-sac. You can see the property line on the bottom right there, the little pony wall, little stucco fence. So they took out their grass and put in desert adapted plants, and now it blends in with the common area. Those trees are actually in the common area, but it looks like it's part of their yard, so the yard looks much larger. Oh, I guess I forgot this one. This is xeriscape doesn't just apply to where we live. It can be other areas as well. A dry landscape for plants that use less water can occur just about anywhere. This one happens to be in Texas. And so they took out their ground cover and put in Texas plants. Some of them you could probably use here, but plants that use far less water and a lot more attractive. If you have plastic under your existing granite in your yard, you may want to consider getting rid of it. Eventually it kind of works its way to the top, and then you see the black plastic, or even though if you use landscape fabric. And it doesn't allow for water or oxygen exchange down in the soil. So if you're planning a renovation, it would be a good time to get rid of your plastic at the same time. There are some great resources to help you select plants. One we saw a little earlier, up in the top left, the landscape plant book. That one is available in hard copy, as I mentioned, from your conservation office, or you can see it online at this address. Now, this is on your reference list, so you don't need to write this down, but it's we call it AMWA, A-M-W-U-A, amwa.org. There are some books that you might find helpful, and those are also on your reference list. And in the center on the bottom, this is a website, and anyone can use it. It just happens to be hosted by the city of Chandler, but Queen Creek folks can use it. Anyone across the valley can use this link. So it's Water Saving Plants, chandlerwatersavingplants.com. And there's over 600 plants highlighted on this website, as well as examples of landscapes and examples of landscape elements. There's a brief description on your resource list. And here are the two websites that you can go to for more information, the City of Chandler or the Town of Queen Creek. These are also on your reference list. Now, the next section that we're going to go through is actual landscape plants. But I just want to remind you of the class materials that you should have received when you signed up for the class. If you didn't get these, contact the City of Chandler, and they will make sure that you get these in your hands. They'll email them out to you. But the one we're going to be looking at next is this one, the one that looks more like a table. And it starts off with trees. Okay, are you ready? You need a drink of water? You need to get up and stretch your legs? Now, I won't be going through all the trees on the list, but most of those plants are in the Landscape Plants for Arizona brochure, or they are online. But I just don't have time to go through every single one, so don't get confused. So I may be skipping a few of the trees and so on that are listed there. But we'll start out with this one. This is Acacia farnesiana, or sweet acacia. And don't worry about pronouncing these botanical names. The important thing is to have a resource that you can take to the nursery with you to make sure you get the right plant. And if you have the botanical name, then that will ensure that you get the plant that you really want. But again, you don't have to know how to pronounce it. Just bring the resource with you so that you can match it up with the name on the plant. Sweet acacia, it's one of the first to bloom in the spring, and they have these sort of golden puffball flowers that are heavily scented. This tree does not get extremely large, 20 by 20 might be an average size. It does have thorns, which make it a great wildlife plant. Plants with thorns deter predators from getting into the bird nests and so on. But just know that if in case that's something you don't want in your yard. And here's another acacia. This is Acacia salicina. We have a lot of plants that grow well here in our location that come from other places, other deserts of the world. This particular acacia comes from Australia, and they call it the willow acacia because it kind of has that willow form, not because it needs a lot of water. It just has that sort of weeping look to it. And it has sort of cream colored puffball flowers. It has kind of a vertical growth habit, so it can grow or it can fit into fairly tight areas. Just check your size. And this is its cousin, also from Australia. This is Acacia stenophila, or shoestring acacia. And it does get fairly large, probably about, close to 30 feet tall, not too wide, 20 feet wide perhaps. But again, it has kind of you could almost see through it in some places. It has white or cream colored flowers, and the seeds that follow they're very kind of interesting. They're kind of constricted in between each little seed. This is one of our natives. This is Acacia willardiana, or Palo Blanco, and it's a fairly small sized tree, maybe 15 feet tall and 10 feet wide at the most. A really interesting characteristic is the way that its bark peels off in real thin, papery layers, and the bark underneath, after it peels, is very white looking. So it makes a nice patio tree. Here it is in the Scottsdale Xeriscape Garden, and they've sort of created a little forest of these Palo Blancos. Most of the time, palm trees they're hard for landscapes. I mean, people sort of like that, palm tree look, especially around pools. But palm trees grow tall, and then they require someone to climb up, and trim them. But this one stays fairly small. It grows slow. This is the Mexican blue palm, and they're very interesting to look at as far as their color. So you might consider this if you have a pool and you want a palm tree that won't outgrow its size in a short time. Well, a lot of trees bloom in the spring, but this one blooms in the fall. It'll start flowering here before too much longer. This is the cascalote, or Caesalpinia cacalaco. It flowers on the terminal ends of the branches, so on the tips. And the flowers are slightly scented, and hummingbirds love this plant. Now, some of the trees have thorns on the trunk, but one of the local growers has developed one that they call the smoothie that has no thorns on the trunk. And our native, this is the blue palo verde. And botanists are always changing plant names, the botanical names. And it used to be called Circidium floridum. Now it's called Parkinsonia florida. But you can probably find it listed either way in various references. But this is the blue palo verde. It's one of our state trees. And it gets large. You can get, 30 feet, 25, 30 feet. So be sure and give it plenty of room. There are some Palo Verde hybrids available that do not have thorns. They generally get fairly large, 20 by 25 by 25 would be, probably an average size. But the thing that is attractive to them or about them is that they don't have thorns. And this is our other state tree, the little leaf Palo Verde, sometimes called the foothills Palo Verde. It has a smaller size, maybe 15 by 15, and the flowers are much more pale. The Palo Brea comes to us from further south in Mexico. It's often also called Sonoran Palo Verde or the Palo Brea. It has a kind of a different growth form, these long sort of whip-like branches, and it does have some serious thorns. It's beautiful yellow flowers in the spring. The trunk stays green, which a lot of people like. And it's just a photo of a Palo Verde in a landscape. If you like hummingbirds and want to attract them to your landscape, this tree will do it. This is the desert willow. Again, not a true willow, but it grows along the ephemeral washes in the desert. And it comes in a variety of flower colors, from pale pink to dark rose, even a bicolor. It is deciduous, so it will lose its leaves in the winter. This tree does not look like a typical desert tree, but it is very well adapted here. The Indian rosewood or sisu, Dalbergia sisu. It has sort of bright green leaves, but remember its mature size. If you haven't planted one yet and you're thinking about it, be sure and give it lots of space because these trees can get enormous. Here's a photo of one on the U of A campus in Tucson, and as you can tell, it's over 3 stories tall. Another one of our natives, this is the ironwood. It is found only in the Sonoran Desert, and they have a very unique flower that looks like little sweet peas, kind of from lavender to sort of pale pink. They generally bloom about the 1st of May, and they make a nice landscape tree. For those of you that might be missing the colorful fall foliage, here's a tree that will remind you of back east. This is the Chinese pistache. Has brilliant fall colors. The trees come either male or female, and if you're lucky enough to get a female tree, you'll also have the red berries. An evergreen tree, this is Texas ebony. They've renamed this one too. Now they call it Ebenacea's ebano, but Texas ebony. It is evergreen. It does have some thorns, and it does have woody seed pods, but the seed pods are heavy, they fall, and then they don't move, they don't blow around like some other trees. And then, of course, mesquites. There are several different varieties. I'm not sure if there's a true Chilean mesquite around anymore because they've hybridized so frequently, but they make nice trees if they're grown correctly. Pretty green foliage. This is the honey mesquite, which has a more pendulous look to the branches, the tips of the branches, and the leaves are much larger. Our native is the velvet mesquite. The leaves have just a hint of grayish to the green rather than a bright green. Just a landscape example with mesquite, even in a pool too. And here's a tree that is used pretty frequently. This is the evergreen elm, although it's not really evergreen. It loses its leaves for about a month or so in late winter. It has small leaves, parvifolia, means small leaves, and the seeds are the little sort of oval structures that you see right in the center of that image. They're very small. They're kind of papery almost. And here's one that's a little bit different. This is the Vitex Agnes castus, or the chaste tree. It's also called monk's pepper. It has these, comes in 3 colors. This is the most common, kind of a bluish lavender color, bluish purple, but it also comes in white and pink. It blooms at the tips of the branches, and the leaves are very distinctive too, have a very unique form. It doesn't get very big, and it is deciduous in the winter. Okay, now we're going to move on to shrubs. In general, these plants get to be about 3 to 4 feet tall in our landscapes. This one is a little unique. You might only be able to find it at perhaps the Desert Botanical Garden sale, or some specialty nurseries that have some desert plants. The leaves are kind of heart-shaped, and they feel just like velvet. They're very, very soft. And the little flowers, it only comes one color. The little flowers are these sort of cup-like structures. It's related to hibiscus, and you can kind of see the resemblance there. Only gets about 3 feet tall. Here's another one. This was called flame honeysuckle. It has these tubular orange flowers that hummingbirds just, go crazy over. Woolly butterfly bush has soft foliage, and the flowers are actually a little, oops, went too far. Let me go back. The flowers are this little sphere shape, orange sphere shape, that consists of about a couple dozen flowers, just kind of all combined into one structure. And then we have the desert bird of paradise. Here's where it gets confusing. This botanical name is Caesalpinia gillesii, but there are about 4 or 5 different Caesalpinia plants, and be sure that you're getting the one that you want. So again, take your book or take your reference with you. So this is desert bird of paradise, and it has kind of an open structure to it. The flowers are yellow, but they have very, very long red stamens. Stamens are the part that holds the pollen. They're actually from Argentina, but it's naturalized all the way up into the US. And here is Mexican bird of paradise. This is different. Now, this is Caesalpinia mexicana, and it can be a large shrub or a small tree, depending on the way you prune it. Stays evergreen most of the year and flowers most of the year. Here is more of the tree form. Doesn't get very big, maybe 10 feet tall, 10-ish feet tall. And here we have the red bird of paradise. This is the one that you see, it blooms all summer long. It has a different color selection. So if you don't want orange, there is the one that comes in yellow, and it's just called the yellow selection. It's the same plant, Caesalpinia pulcherrima, but this one is the yellow flowered selection. Kind of a very tropical look to it. Now, most of the time, these plants are cut down almost to the ground in the wintertime, which isn't really necessary. So I have a challenge for you. If you like the red bird of paradise and you want something a little different, maybe you could, well, there's the yellow flower. maybe you could let it grow into a small tree. It's just a suggestion. This is Baja Fairy Duster. It grows about 4 or 5 feet tall and has very interesting flowers. They are a collection of the stamens, the part that holds the pollen. It doesn't have any petals, but hummingbirds love this plant. And then it has a smaller cousin. This is the pink fairy duster. Only gets about 2 feet tall, and the flowers are ranging from pink to light pink, dark pink. Something about the color white just looks really clean and crisp. This is a little leaf cordia, and it has, or sometimes I call it the popcorn plant because it's a collection of little white flowers. It has a cousin that looks more tropical. This one's going to call it Texas olive or Cordia boissieri. And it can grow into a small tree, large shrub, small tree, and the flowers are much larger. Hopbush makes a nice screening plant, and it works well around pools. It doesn't have much litter, and the flowers are so small that you probably won't even see them. There is one variety that turns purple when we get cold weather. Otherwise, they stay green all year. No thorns. It's a nice plant. And here's one that grows all over the desert. This is brittlebush or Encelia farinosa. This time of year, you'd never notice it because they're drought deciduous. So when we don't get any rain or enough rain, they drop their leaves. And then when we get some winter rains, then they get their foliage again. And about February, they start blooming. They can cover the mountainsides. The foliage is almost silver, grayish silver color. They take almost no water. Once you get them established in your landscape, you can almost turn the water off completely. And here it is in a landscape example. This shrub is fairly new. It's been on the market for maybe 8 years, something like that. It's becoming more and more popular. It's from Australia. It's Eremophila hierophana or blue Eremophila. It looks almost like a Texas sage at a distance, but if you get closer, the flowers are much bigger. And it only grows about 3 feet tall, so it's a nice size for most landscapes. And here's a close-up of the flower. Here is its cousin. This is the red Eremophila, and it is just a big green shrub for most of the year. They get fairly large, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall and wide. But in the early spring, they have these beautiful sort of red fuchsia flowers on them. Sometimes they'll be marketed as the Valentine plant because they're usually in full bloom on Valentine's Day. This is one of our native hibiscus, the San Marcos hibiscus, and it has nice glossy green heart-shaped leaves. The flowers are only come one color, which is yellow, with these sort of 5 red dots at the base of the petals. San Marcos hibiscus, and it's a nice size. It's maybe a 3-foot shrub. Doesn't get any bigger than that. Early in the spring, this plant is in full bloom. This is a tuberosa or Justicia californica. They can get pretty large, and sometimes you won't notice the leaves because the leaves just appear in the early spring and then they're dropped during the rest of the year. But the hummingbirds just go crazy over this one. And the flowers are actually edible. You can pick them and put them in salads. They taste like mild cucumber. And it has a cousin. This is the Mexican honeysuckle. This is Disticia spicidura. It has larger leaves, and the flowers are more of an orange color, but it gives a more tropical look to a landscape. Oh, I don't have a close-up of the flower on that one, sorry. One of our true desert natives is the creosote bush or Lyria tridentata, and it, of course, grows on our surrounding deserts. Doesn't take much water. If you want to put one in your landscape, you need to water it in the beginning, of course, and then wean it off your root system. Because if you water it too much, they become enormous. But it has small yellow flowers, followed by these really fuzzy seed pods. They're very small, but they're kind of interesting to look at. This is the plant that gives mostly our summer storms that aroma when they come off the desert. It's kind of almost a clean medicinal smell. If you stroke the foliage, you can definitely tell it has aromatic oils. Texas sage comes in many different sizes, many different colors. The original ones that were marketed were 6 to 8 foot tall shrubs. They had the pink cloud and the purple cloud and things like that. Now they've been able to develop some Texas sage that don't get near as big. So in the 3 foot, 4 foot size. So depending on how much room you have, be sure you look at that mature size on the tag. This is called Desert Ruellia, and it's related to a plant that is called Mexican petunia, but this one is a shrub. This one is not invasive, but it has the same sort of purple flowers that look very similar to that Mexican petunia. About a 3 foot size at maturity. And then this is actually, I think, more of a small tree than it is a shrub, but they grow fairly slow. This is the Texas mountain laurel, and the one in the picture, the mature one, is a little over a 1-story building, but it's been there for 20 some years. They bloom in late February, early March with these clusters of purple flowers that smell just like grape Kool-Aid. This one's evergreen. And yellow bells. We have all different kinds of the bells. We have the Arizona yellow bells that can be fairly large, and then there are some cultivars that they've developed that are much smaller that only stay in the 4 foot range. But they have this one has yellow flowers, and we also have orange bells. One thing that we have a new pest that's been around for 3 or 4 years that now targets both the orange bells and the yellow bells, and it's a little caterpillar. This is what the damage looks like. So if you see your leaves starting to look a little papery with all these sort of black spots on them, this is the culprit. He's a little caterpillar, and he rolls himself up in the leaf, so it's really hard to spray anything that will reach him. But if you use a product that contains this is BT or Bacillus thuringiensis. When he eats the leaf that's been sprayed with this, it's a bacteria, then it kills him. And here is, pronounced BT, yeah. This is one product. Here's another one. Both of these contain that Bacillus thuringiensis. So when you go to the store, to the home improvement store, just look for a product that contains Bacillus thuringiensis, and that will, then you know that that can be used on your yellow bells or orange bells to kill the caterpillars. You can also use it on tomatoes to kill those tomato hornworms. It's completely safe for people, pets, fish. It only targets caterpillars. Or if you have grapes, if you get those grape leaf skeletonizers, this will work on that too. Okay, ground covers. Let's rush through this because we have just a few minutes left. Okay, this is Damianita. It has yellow flowers. It's not very tall. Each little individual plant probably grows about a foot. But look what happens when you combine it with something with purple flowers. It really just makes the whole thing look a lot more interesting and pretty. This happens to be one of the verbenas, but you could use any purple flowering plant. This is lemon dahlia. It might be a little harder to find. Each little plant will grow to about 8 feet wide, but it's very short, and it has little tiny yellow flowers. The foliage smells like lemon, so it might make your yard smell good. And then we have another ground cover. This is one of the Aramophilas from Australia with yellow flowers. This one is called a ground cover, but only because you can plant it on about 2 or 3 foot centers and create a ground cover. This is blue euphorbia, one of the first to bloom in the spring. And lantana. Who doesn't love lantana? Here's a close-up of the flower. There's dozens of little tiny flowers in each little bundle. Tufted evening primrose. I'm going to skim through these pretty fast here. Here's an example. And if you have rosemary, this is the same one you buy in the grocery store and pay big bucks for. It's the same as the landscape plant. But look how it looks so pretty cascading over raised planters. Vines, this is coral vine. It's deciduous, but has these pretty sort of rose-colored flowers during the warm months. And bougainvillea, it's a vine, a big vine if you let it grow. Hardenbergia is one of the first to bloom in the spring, and the rest of the year it just has nice green foliage, sometimes called lilac vine. They do not smell though, no fragrance. Another vine with yellow flowers. This is the Marimia aurea or yucca vine. And this is a big one, trumpet vine. It will grow on the west side, north side, well, not north, no, south side, west side, south side. The Lady Banks rose is a thornless rose. It comes in white or yellow. There's all kinds of cactus. They come in, you know, they're giants, they're small. Some bloom at night. You can create groupings. They always have these gorgeous flowers. Some don't have thorns. The choices are limitless. So see what works well for you. And then we have things like agaves. When they bloom, of course, they attract pollinators, but it also signals the end of the life of the mother plant. So you may be, I hope you're not surprised when that happens, but usually there are offsets at the bottom of the plant that you can reroot and replace in your landscape. Aloes come in many different shapes and sizes. Some are, they call them tree form, but they attract hummingbirds and other pollinators. Even desert milkweed. This one is pollinated by one of our local butterflies. This is the larval form, the caterpillar, but the queen butterfly is attracted to the desert milkweed. This is a small little plant that looks, if it wasn't flowering, you'd think it was green onions, but this is bulbi and it's actually related to aloe. And this is a desert adapted plant, but it's not a palm tree at all. It's actually a very ancient plant that's more closely related to pine trees. Believe it or not, yes, pine trees. When they bloom, here's the male. It's a cone, right? And the female will produce the seeds. Isn't that crazy? They do like a little shade. The full sun is really tough on them. So if you give them afternoon shade, they will love you for it. No, I'm not sure why it said that to me. There we go. Desert spoon is related to yuccas, and they get tortured in our landscapes, so which can impact their health. So please try and leave as many leaves on them as possible. Ocotillos. Hummingbirds love the flowers. And we have red yucca. This is a very popular plant, very clean, hardly any litter at all. There's also a yellow flowered form. And other yuccas, they have a kind of an upright growth habit. And the flowers are edible. Here's an landscape example. The grasses soften our landscapes, and these are the bunching grasses. I'm not talking Bermuda. This is Muhlenbergia, or something they're called muley grasses. This is Muhlenbergia capillaris. Has kind of a pink cast to it when it blooms. And then we also have deer grass, Muhlenbergia origens, and both of them look nice around water features or pools. Perennials, these are the plants that you don't have to reseed. They last a long time in our landscapes, and most of them are fairly small, like desert marigold. Here it is as an example, kind of grayish foliage. Chocolate flower, this is a perennial. And when it opens in the morning, they smell just like milk chocolate. Here's an example. This one has Angelina daisy in the front, penstemon in the back. Blackfoot daisy has white flowers. Another landscape example. And penstemon, these are usually early spring bloomers, and they come in pink, orange, red. That's kind of their color range. Hummingbirds love them. Paper flower, this one you might have to find it at the Desert Botanical Garden sale. It has yellow flowers that dry on the plant, almost like a dried flower arrangement in your yard. It's very interesting. And this is a popular one, coral fountain. It sends up these tall stalks with tubular sort of scarlet pink flowers on them. We have some true sages that you might want to try. They have purple flowers. And Globe Mallow comes in, orange is the original color, but now there are selections with red and pink. If you have a little shade, you might want to try this one. This is Alschneria californica. And rain lilies. The most common ones are pink and white. There is a peach variety too. They bloom right after our summer rains, which didn't happen too much this year. Annuals, of course, are the flowers that complete their life cycle in 1 year or 1 season. This is a tiny one, golden disodia. And here it is combined with some, I think this is purple verbena. And another one of those purple orange or purple yellow combinations. Blanket flower is a summer bloomer. And Maximilian sunflower, it's grouped here because it's the root stock is hardy. If we get a really cold winter, the tops might die down, but then they will come right back from the root stock. And desert bluebells are one of our annuals that have just intensely blue flowers. And a couple out of the ordinary, and then we're done. If you have some shade, this is one of our columbines, a native columbine that you might want to give a try. Or we have at the top right, we have bat-faced kufia, also needs a little shade, but still little purple faces. And on the bottom left, we have shrimp plant. It'll grow on the north side. And here is skyflower. It has clusters of little purple or light blue flowers. This one they call tree morning glory, grows on tall stalks, and the flowers open in the early morning and then close as the day gets warmer. I had a lime scented geranium in my yard, which the leaves kind of smelled like lime. But when it flowered, I was so surprised that the flowers are so pretty. So I thought I'd include it here. So that's our message. You can save water by using desert adapted plants. If you have questions, you can use the Q&A. And these are the references that are on your reference list. This is the website for WaterWise Landscaping in Chandler that has all the plants and more plant design, yard design ideas. The 2 hosts for tonight, Chandler and Queen Creek, and how you can reach them. And of course, we want to thank you for joining us. And here's how to reach the city of Chandler or the town of Queen Creek.
Thanks, Kathy, for an awesome presentation. I just want to thank everyone as well for attending class today. Here, like Kathy said, here you can find the city and town websites for more information or resources, along with our contact information. We do have a short survey about the Color Your World class that will pop up once you exit the class. We would appreciate it if you would please just take a minute to complete it for us so that we can use it to improve our classes in the future. But I just want to thank you again and hope everyone has a great rest of the evening. Thank you.